My name is Dr. James Bylund. I'm the owner and director of the Bylund Clinic, and I'm super excited because today we have Sean McCormick, the founder and executive director of EF Specialists with us. One of my primary goals in starting this podcast was to be able to connect families and other professionals, with resources throughout the Bay Area by bringing on service providers like Sean to be able to talk about the work that they're doing. And I'm really a huge fan of the work that Sean's been doing for years now, both in supporting children and their families, as well as providing professional development. And I'm just thrilled to have you here today, Sean, to talk about the work that you've been doing. So maybe you can just start for listeners who aren't familiar with you, just telling them a little bit about yourself and about EF Specialists.
Thank you, Dr. Bylund, for having me on. I'm excited to be here and to share my message and chat with you. So my name is Sean McCormick. I'm a former classroom public education special ed teacher. I taught in Buffalo, New York, and Marin, and taught there for about 4.5 years in Marin. And the more work I did, the more I realized that the main thing preventing students from being successful was a lack of an ability to self-organize and self-direct, because you can tell people what to do, but they need the ability to actually formulate their own goals and then plot out a course to get there and take action. So as I realized that more and more, I realized that I wanted to really focus on that and less on standardized testing or more, compliance-based things that didn't actually serve the essential skills that students need for long-term success. So slowly I started coaching kids on the side, which grew into my business, Executive Function Specialists, which is a coaching program for students typically with ADHD and autism who struggle with executive function skills. And as that grew, more and more people wanted to do what I was doing, and it wasn't realistic to hire everybody. So I created a training program called the Executive Function Coaching Certification Course through my business, the Executive Function Coaching Academy. And that's grown, and we've trained hundreds of educators throughout the world at this point, in probably almost every continent on Earth, which has been awesome to spread the message. And then about 1.5 years ago, I also partnered with a business partner, Eric Kaufman, who's another special educator, and we started Upskill Specialists, which is a adult executive function coaching company. And we primarily work with self-determination clients throughout the state of California adults who need help developing executive skills so they can manage their lives. So I wear a few different hats, but all of it is really focused around the mission of helping people develop their executive function skills so they can improve their quality of life.
Yeah, man, that's incredible. Everything that you've been able to accomplish in the time span that you've been doing this, man, it's incredible. And I know, anytime we're doing an assessment and we have a kid that has ADHD or autism and associated executive functioning skills, we're always letting them know about EF Specialists and the incredible work that you're doing. And I didn't even realize now that you've branched out into the work you're doing with adults too, because it's obviously an area that there's a lot of individuals that could use some help, but not a lot of people really specializing in that aspect of coaching adults with executive functioning deficits. That's awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I thank you so much for sending people to us. It's really a true, it means a lot to me, to be referred by people like yourself with such expertise and the depth of the work you're doing in your assessments and IEs. For those who don't know, independent educational assessments to really determine what is missing and needed. So I'm really grateful that you do that and share our work with people. Yeah,
and I don't want to get us too derailed here, but it's nice to be able to do the type of assessment that we do, right? Where we can, we look at a lot of different areas of functioning, and we can say like, hey, like where are these skill deficits, and get into some detail in terms of what aspects of executive functioning a child's having challenges with. But then we can hand them off to you and your team, and you guys can get like really granular in terms of like how do these executive functioning deficits like actually manifest in this child's day-to-day functioning, and what are the really prescribed specific interventions that we can provide, to not only sort of help them compensate for those challenges, but like you said, develop the skills to be able to function independently, as well too. So it's great for families to be able to get the level of detail with regards to their child's executive functioning needs that you guys are able to provide.
I definitely want to dig into that more later. I know we're kind of like working our way, but that is something I'd really like to talk about more, because I feel like as a special ed teacher, most assessments are done by the school district, and those are typically, I would say, not surface level, but they tend to not, executive function skills are not even like, I tell this to people. I was like, I didn't hear that word or like phrase almost ever in my 5.5 years in public school special education, but it's literally constant in the
Mhm.
neuropsychs that I receive from people like yourself. And if we can't even like identify or talk about it, and this is kind of the main thing that's holding many, many students back from being successful, we're really missing the mark in terms of how to effectively serve students. So I'm sure we'll get into that later, but
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. Well, so why don't we actually sort of stay on that point for a little bit here though, and just for parents who might have heard the term executive functioning, but not may not be entirely clear on what exactly that is. How would you define executive functioning, and what are some things that parents might notice in terms of their child's executive functioning skills?
Yeah, so the hard part about executive functioning is it's been researched. I mean, if you Googled in a scientific journal executive functioning, you'd find hundreds of articles, if not more. And it's been deeply researched. I feel like I haven't seen stuff, before the 80s, but like 80s, 90s, 2000s, like tons of research and textbooks and things like that. But for some reason, it's not just really, I don't know, it's not so mainstream or something,
Mhm.
as it seems to be getting more there now with the rise of ADHD awareness. But executive functioning is your brain, but I also want to extend that to your body. I think that a lot of these skills are housed in your body. Your body's ability to identify long-term goals or key goals, and then plan, organize, and take action towards completing those goals.
Mhm.
And that requires a range of skills. And those executive functioning skills, I've broken down into an acronym called POSITIVE. And POSITIVE stands for planning, organization, self-management, inhibition, time management, initiation of challenging tasks, visualizing outcomes, and evaluating priorities. Now there are more, Dr. Peg Dawson, who wrote Smart but Scattered. She says there's 11 skills. Other people say there's 13. I've broken it down into that acronym just to make it accessible for parents. And so I just want to differentiate. There's the executive functions, which are like your, cognitive inhibition, or your ability to basically like pause a negative thought that might be preventing you from focusing on what you need to do, or your flexible thinking, like, oh, I see these two different things and I can combine them to make one idea. So there's those kind of like cognitive, I wouldn't say skills, but processes. So that's executive functions. And then there's the executive function skills like, okay, I'm going to work on my planning. I'm going to work on my emotional regulation by doing, breathing when I get frustrated. So there's the skills and the processes. I
Mhm.
don't, and this is something you could probably articulate better than I can. I'm kind of the belief that the cognitive processes are somewhat biological, but the skills can be developed through
Yeah.
deliberate practice.
Yeah.
So it's just a way to kind of understand what those things are.
Yeah, I love the acronym positive, and just to make it accessible to people, because you're right. I mean, there's a lot of different people out there that have researched and written about executive functioning skills, and I've seen some lists that were like 64 different executive functioning skills, right? And it almost becomes impossible to wrap your head around and actually do something about it. But I also like that differentiation between sort of these cognitive abilities and practical skills, right? And I like to think of like executive functioning skills as and some people talk about as like the central executive, like the CEO of the brain. But I also like to think about it as my ability to execute a task, right? Like that executive function is that ability to
Mhm.
execute, and that really kind of comes down to those practical skills, right? So I might have some innate capacity to regulate my attention, to sort of manage information in my mind. But then there's these skills that we can learn and cultivate and develop in order to be able to function more independently and more successfully. And that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, right? And that's the work that you guys are doing to help young people, and sounds like adults too, to actually develop these skills, which is fantastic.
And as you shared, it reminded me of one of the most important elements of executive functioning, which is I define it as your brain, or your ability to respond to things that are outside of the automatic processing
Okay.
process, right? So like we can go make coffee in the morning, execute on that task when things are fine, right? When there's no issue. But could you do that same task when the in-laws are in town and your kids are screaming, right?
Yeah.
Can you execute on things when the environment is changing or adjusting? So it's your ability to retain your skills even under environmental stimuli or
Yeah.
conditions changing,
Right.
which is an important aspect because anybody can do something in a vacuum, but can you, I'm thinking of like a president, right? Like, can you make decisions while there's tons of pressure on you? Can you retain your executive skills even in the midst of chaos? So
Yeah.
that's also an important aspect of it, is that how do your skills function under pressure, under increasing challenge, which is
Yeah.
life, right? Like life typically gets more and more challenging as we have more responsibilities, children, things like that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we'll see that sometimes in our evaluations too, where if we say we're doing an assessment for a very bright child or adolescent who may test really well, right? And so we're trying to administer these standardized tests, which inherently, just by design, because we're trying to isolate a single skill, really eliminate a lot of executive functioning demands, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
so say like working memory, we're like, okay, we're going to say something, we want you to repeat it, or we want you to execute on the instructions that we give you. But we're in a quiet environment. There's no distractions. They're responding to a single prompt at a time. They execute the task and they come back for the next prompt. I mean, it doesn't mirror what's the demands on somebody in their day-to-day functioning, right? Which is again, kind of leans into the work that you guys are doing, but also why we're gathering information from parents and we're gathering information from teachers and outside service providers to see how, kids function day to day. Because you're right, like it's one thing to demonstrate a skill, in a, contained environment. It's very different to be able to do that, day to day. So it's, really, really excellent point. Now, obviously, I mean, kids' executive functioning skills, vary widely, right? And we were talking earlier. I've got a 13-year-old. I don't think he has any executive functioning deficits, but certainly has some executive functioning challenges. Sometimes when we're getting ready to go to school in the morning, for example. So obviously these things kind of exist along a continuum. What are just some kind of practical strategies that you think parents can implement kind of across the board to kind of help their kids with executive functioning?
Yeah. So for a long time, great question. So for a long time, I've always focused on like things you should notice in your kid. Oh, they have missing assignments. They get dysregulated when you're putting pressure on them. Let's get out the door, right? Uh, they may be afraid to communicate with their teachers or avoidant of things. I mean, if we're just thinking in terms of school, as they get older, it could be that failure to launch reality where, they don't want to leave home, but they also don't want to take on responsibility at home if you're like, hey, you're gonna have to pay rent then, and things like that. So I think it's like you kind of define, not executing on things that are expected and appropriate for their age. Now there is also a caveat there, which is kids with ADHD who typically have executive function challenges tend to be lagging. Peg Dawson says 30% behind their neurotypical peers in
Mhm.
terms of emotional and brain development. So we have to account for that, which isn't typically accounted for. But yeah, I would say, the inability to execute on what is perceived as age appropriate tasks is probably a sign. But
Mhm.
I have been having this thought as I've worked with more and more parents and educators, is that so often parents and even educators are focused on what the kid needs to fix. But I think a lot of parents and educators should start with themselves. And
Mhm.
that what I mean by that is, hey, are you staying regulated when you're frustrated? Are you waking up a little bit earlier before your kids so that you can kind of like set the stage for them coming down and being successful in the morning? I mean, these are things I'm working on too as I
Yeah.
parent. So I do think it's important for parents to really own their role and model executive skills and not just be like, my kid needs to fix it, but I'm dysregulated when I come home from work and I'm frustrated all the time. It's something we should really think about. Like, are we modeling and displaying the executive skills that we want to promote for our
Yeah.
kids?
That's an excellent point. I mean, well, it actually does kind of tie into executive functioning skills, frankly, a little bit too. But I was just having that conversation with somebody recently just about like recreational screen use, right? And trying to kind of put some boundaries in place for a child's recreational screen use. And I think it's so important too that just as parents, right, we're modeling that same behavior, right? Like if I don't want my kids scrolling YouTube while we're trying to have a conversation, I probably shouldn't be dividing my attention between work email and having a conversation with them either. So it's I like that example of really sort of or that point, right, of really sort of modeling behaviors we're trying to instill in our children.
Yeah. It's like self-awareness. That's a key executive skill, right? Are you aware of how you are displaying your behaviors, right? And like so many parents, and I'm guilty of it too. I'm not saying I'm
Oh,
perfect here, but it's like,
me too.
grabbing your phone while you're driving and changing the song or whatever. It's like, is that the executive skills you want to model and display
Yeah.
for your kids? And ultimately it comes down to this idea of sweeping your side of the street before you. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking proactive action to support your kids, but just the mistake I see most parents and educators make is they're constantly finding fault with the child
Yeah.
rather than saying, hey, what's in my control? What can I facilitate and create first before I start to just see them as the problem and the, issue?
Yeah, for sure. Now, yeah, and again, all these things, exist along a continuum, and I really like that advice too, in terms of modeling the behaviors that we're trying to instill in our kids, and some kids really do have just really severe, executive functioning challenges, and it can be really overwhelming, for parents to,
For sure.
raising a child with those challenges. So, what advice might you give to parents who's, really overwhelmed by the severity of their child's executive functioning challenges?
Yeah. I mean, first thought is always like you need help, right? Like as a parent, you are not necessarily equipped to assess and determine the severity and what the impact. So that's the beautiful part about special education law is that you can request an assessment, right? And so you can say, hey, even I think as young as like 2 years old, you can request that your child be assessed. And now you're probably not going to be fully aware of executive skill delays at that age, but you'll start to see it, as they get older. And we have a great article on EF specialists in the article section about what executive skills I should see at what age.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's something you could check out. I'm sure you have some recommendations on places to look to kind of, you can check on the CDC's developmental milestones, though they don't really zone in on executive skills too much. But ask for an assessment from, your local public education authority and start there, right? And say like, hey, is this me just being over concerned, or is there some actual objective, research driven evidence that my child has an executive skill delay? Now, what we find and what we both know, Dr. Bylund, is that sometimes those assessments are not targeted enough to truly evaluate executive skills delay. But you do want to start there, exercise that option. And then if the assessment doesn't feel comprehensive or thorough enough, you can request an independent educational assessment, which would be done by someone like Dr. Bylund or another professional in your area. Now, that's complicated, but all that is free to parents, right? If you go through the steps, and we have detailed guides on how to request an assessment, how to follow up and request an independent educational assessment on efspecialist.com, along with providers in our directory. So all that stuff is available to you, but you do have to get curious and to be, you have to execute on these steps rather than just staying in worry and concern. So that's what I would recommend, if you're concerned about that stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, great advice, right? And like you said, I mean, that assessment, will help sort of identify whether or not those challenges that they're experiencing are significant, given their age and developmental level, and start to provide some guideposts in terms of how to go about, helping the child. And I agree too, right? I mean, there are certain things that we can do as parents, to be able to help our children. And there's reasons there's professionals like you out there, because it's unrealistic, I think, for parents to be able to do everything, right? And they've got other careers, and they're focused on raising their children and all the things that they need to do day to day. And most parents are not experts in executive functioning like yourself and your team, who have years of knowledge and skill to be able to provide the support that's really required. They had some good advice there in terms of like reaching out to the school and starting the assessment process, which which I'm telling parents all the time, right? Like, have you talked to the school yet? Have you made a request from the school yet to complete an evaluation? Is there, given your experience, both with EF specialists, but also having worked in the school system, any other advice you might give to parents in terms of, collaborating, with the school around their child's executive functioning skills?
Yeah, I would say start local, think global. So what I mean by that is if your kid is in a classroom where they're struggling, don't start by emailing the superintendent. Start with the teacher and say, "Hey, I've noticed that my child feels overwhelmed. They don't know how to check their portals to identify what assignments they should be doing, right? Like, here's what we're thinking of doing. How can we work together, right? Like, teachers know a lot. There's a lot of great teachers out there who will work with you, but they have 100 other kids. So you're going to need to collaborate and also be patient and not feel like this is not an overnight solution. Now, if a teacher is unresponsive and disengaged, that's when you could say, "Hey, I've tried emailing you twice. I haven't heard back. I'm going to loop in, the program director." And so you work your way up the ladder to, build, but you're gonna ultimately it's like you're your own best, advocate, right? To start. So I would be tiered and strategic and long term in terms of your thinking. Like, things don't get fixed overnight. Even if your kid, if you immediately get the right whatever case manager or something, it's not going to fix the situation. So you want to start early and be strategic and document your attempts to get help. Keep that organized, right? Like, keep a folder of all the email attempts that you've made, document like, "Hey, I have to sit with my kid for this many hours after school just to get their homework done." Like, being very methodical about it. And then if you're building a case that, like, "Hey, my kid has, is this normal that I should be sitting with my kid for 2 hours to do their math homework?" If not, which is it's not, you should then start to, like, try to collaborate with the school team. Now, that's where, if it becomes too taxing and it doesn't work, if you're in a public school, you're entitled to something called FAPE, free and appropriate public education. And that is a interpretive statement, meaning what is appropriate. You can interpret that and you can work with others to figure out, like, "Hey, how can we make this work as a team?" Because ultimately the public education system is a resource that is meant to be, it's taxpayer funded and it's meant to serve you. It doesn't mean you're just like the owner and you're the only one who gets anything, but it means like everybody, including people who have, very limited resources as well as extensive resources, are entitled to being treated free and or inappropriately through this process.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 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 great point. And it's I mean, fortunately, right, we live in a time now where a lot of this information, is available to parents. I remember when I started working in schools, you had no access to special education regulations unless you ordered from the State Department of Education something that looked like a 2,000-page book of all the regulations, and parents just didn't know any different. And now so much information is available, online, but it does take still quite a bit of effort, on the part of the parent to learn about what resources are available for their child, and that if they have a child with some type of neurodevelopmental disability, like ADHD, that there's certain legal protections in place to ensure that their child has access to, like you said, an appropriate education, right? It doesn't mean that they, get everything under the sun, right? But they do, have a right to be able to access and progress in the curriculum, comparable to their non-disabled peers. And so it is important, that parents are, doing their due diligence and learning about things like FAPE, that free appropriate public education, and what does that mean, and how do you help advocate for your child and being able to access it. Now we've certainly, talked about, a fair amount about some of the, challenges kids with executive functioning, weaknesses face. I was wondering if you could share with us, a success story that you have for when a child's really benefited from, executive functioning coaching.
So yeah, there's so many, and that's why I really love what I do and what I help people do, because the logo for or the mantra or the whatever phrase for our business is the key to your future. And I truly believe that executive skills are the key to your future, because when you believe and know how to execute on your own visions and goals, and create things in your life, it's like a magical experience. It's very empowering. So, I mean, the one thing that I consciously decided to do when I started my business was to focus on really the small stuff that prevents kids from accessing school. So like, hey, how do you identify all your upcoming and missing assignments, put them in a list, and then prioritize, and then email your teacher to confirm a plan. And I mean, I'm just gonna one person comes to mind. She had graduated high school, but she was living at home, and because trying to go to community college had been so overwhelming, she had just given up. And I remember her parents reached out and like, we don't know what to do. We want to help her, but she's too overwhelmed. She doesn't want to re-enroll. And I got on a call with her and I was like, hey, what would you like to do? Like let's say we work together. I'm your coach, and what's different in your life in 6 months?
Mhm.
And she just broke down in tears. And I remember this like vividly. It's like a core memory. She was like, I just want to like get through school and become a nurse,
Mhm.
you know? And we started working together, and she got enrolled in community college, and it was really overwhelming. I think we started with 2 classes at first, and she was really struggling to keep up, but we worked with the disability resource department to ensure she had accommodations, and I helped her write emails to her teachers, and one of them was really responsive and flexible, and she got through the class, but one of them was not responding to her emails. And I remember, because that person didn't respond, she technically failed the class at first. And we emailed our disability resource person. We said, hey, she's tried over and over to reach out, and they looked into it, and they leveled up the case to the program, or like the department chair, and were like, look, this person has tried. She has a disability classification, and this professor didn't respond. So she got a second chance. Instead of just having to retake the class, she got a second chance to pass it. She did, which was like, for her, was a huge victory. She's like,
Oh, I
wow,
bet.
like, because she was in tears. She's like, I've tried so hard. And I mean, this girl was
Yeah.
giving all her effort. It wasn't like
Yeah.
she was avoiding things. Like every day she was working on things.
Yeah.
And that was like, the first 6 months to a year of working together. And then she stayed with us for years, and she ended up, getting through community college, transferring to a nursing program. She moved, to a different state, but kept with it, got in through a nursing program, and became a nurse. And it was like, this was someone
Awesome.
who, just had been so overwhelmed and just felt like there was no options, and
Yeah.
then with support and understanding her rights and getting the help that she needed that wasn't really being provided, she was able to
Yeah.
go out there and help people, right? Like
Right.
heal. So that one,
Yeah.
that one stands out to me. It was just like, I mean, there's so many of those, like
Very.
situations. That one just has a little more, connected to my heart, because she got through school and then went out there and began to serve people, and a lot of the kids we work
Right.
with, it's just based in school, which is fantastic and very meaningful, but we don't always know what happens to them, after
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, so many things come up like listening to that. What a great story, right? That this individual who clearly has the intellect and the ability to be a nurse, which is a demanding job, and to be able to serve people, right? And yet there's this disabling condition that is a barrier between them and being able to do what they're dreaming about being able to do, right? And obviously capable of being able to do. And the idea that now you can have this service, right, through an executive function coach in this instance, right, to help kind of remove that barrier so you can access the things that you're fully capable of doing that, without that service, you can't reach, right? So, I mean, one that's incredible. Another thing that came up at the end there when you're sharing that story is, this is anecdotal, right? I don't have any like numbers behind any of this, but what I've experienced is, a lot of young people who have experienced and overcome challenges, like ADHD or learning disability, or some other kind of neurodevelopmental, or perhaps some mental health challenge when they're growing up, and have experienced that, do kind of go on to enter in these professions where they want to be able to help other people, right? Which
Hmm.
which I think is really incredible in this case that you shared, is just sort of an example of that. And just one other thing is, that kind of came up for me too, is earlier you're talking about like kind of the brain and body. right? And initially I was sort of thinking about just we have these cognitive executive functions like attention, for example, or working memory, and then we've got this our bodies doing executing these things. But here's this example too of this relationship between these maybe cognitive executive functions and sort of the physiological experience of stress and overwhelm, and how it can even the can further sort of shut down our executive functioning abilities, and how the two kind of work simultaneously, where these executive function weaknesses cause this distress shuts down our executive functioning abilities. And really the work of a coach then is teaching these executive skills, but also helping the person to be able to sort of manage those feelings of those physiological feelings of distress, so that they can activate those executive skills to be able to do the work. So, guys, I mean, so much in there, and what a great story.
Thanks. Yeah. And that's definitely something that I feel like we could do a whole podcast on, is like what happens in the body and brain when stress becomes, there's those, I'm forgetting the exact term, but like, we have the ventral vagal, and then we go into the fight, flight or freeze or fawn, zone. And that's where our executive skills shut down, and we just can't do that. And if that happens too much, there's images of the brain where if we're just constantly, and school can be just an ongoing stress experience if kids are not equipped with the skills, and their brains change. I mean, if you look at scans of people who have been under stress too much, the brain actually appears to shrink, and it's not so malleable, it's not so kind of, I guess, like fluffy is like the way I would describe the images of people under stress constantly. So we really, just even for brain development, we really need to equip students to be ready to face this onslaught of overwhelming demands, especially our students with special needs. So thanks for bringing up that important point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially if they're not accessing the services that are necessary. I mean, the example you gave of a young woman in junior college, but our elementary, middle school, and high school students are oftentimes experiencing very high levels of stress, and we're seeing anxiety disorders kind of going through the roof, just as a whole generation of kids. But yeah, if there's some type of learning difference, school can be extremely stressful for these young people. So at the outset, I mean, you shared about all the incredible work that you're doing, right? Obviously, you've got EF specialists. You've also got your coaching academy, and kind of just curious too, for listeners, because this is for both parents and professionals, or some people may be serving both roles. What are some of the things that you're perhaps looking for in a future executive functioning coach, and how do you see that work ultimately benefiting students?
Yeah, so I started the Executive Function Coaching Academy I started building out the course in 2021, and it's a range of things at this point, but the primary thing it is a certification course to help educators primarily, though we do have speech language pathologists, occupational therapists. I've had doctors, attorneys, like all types of people that know how important these things are come through and take the training. But the primary purpose at first was to create I guess you could say like an objective, clearly structured training for my team. And then I realized like my impact can be expanded if I share this with more people. And so I rolled it out as a certification course to train other educators. And it just really grew, quickly, because there's just not a lot of trainings out there that really zone in on how to help students. A lot of it is more theoretical around like what are executive function skills. And this training is like so practical. It's like, if you have a student who's struggling with missing assignments, overwhelmed, not communicating with their teachers, here is a process you can take them through, which will like 99% of the time get the result of them feeling more confident, more capable of emailing their teachers, managing their assignments. And so, the people that I think, that I'm trying to support are people, who's a good fit. I mean, is the question who's a good fit for it, or what sorry, will you rephrase the question?
Yeah, just what are the qualities that you think make a good executive functioning coach?
Right.
And you kind of got at the second part of it a little bit too. Just what's how do you see this the impact that it's having on students? But
Yeah, I mean, I think, for qualities that make a great executive function coach, first I think is, enthusiasm and passion for helping kids be successful. Because if you have that desire to be a support to kids, they're going to feel that energy and developing the skills. It's kind of like aptitude before skill. Like if you have the desire and aptitude, then you can learn the skills. Like that's my belief is that like anyone can learn anything. You just have to provide it them in a form that they can receive it. So I think that passion and desire to help, right? Like that's one of my core beliefs is that like anyone can be of service if you have the right attitude. So that would be the first thing. I think people who tend to quickly pick this up in many cases are people who have background experience in education.
Mhm.
Though it's interesting because a lot of parents who have homeschooled their kids or been their kids' executive function coach without education experience can come in and pick
Mhm.
these things up because they've been doing what wasn't provided by the district or
Yeah.
school system for 10 to 15 years with multiple kids potentially. So I
Yeah.
think one, you have that aptitude and desire to help students. Two, you have background helping kids. And then three, the thing I see, that's so important is kind of a growth mindset, I'd say. So, people come in and if they're like, I can only help kids with a paper planner because that's what I've used my whole life. And they're not willing to try things like, hey, all kids have Google Calendar and tasks on their phone. And if you teach them how to leverage their phone to set notifications to get things done, if you help them use the tools front of them, they're going to be more successful likely instead of just saying
Yeah.
this is the one size fits all because I did it when I was a kid. You're going to be more successful. So I'd say, yeah, having an enthusiasm and aptitude for helping kids. Two, some type of background working with students, and then three, a growth mindset around the helping kids leverage the tools and resources at their disposal, make for
Yeah.
a good coach.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I know again your work is becoming so far-reaching, and I know you're also now advocating policymakers to set up a set of standards for executive functioning skills, and I was hoping you could share a little bit more about the work that you're doing in that space, and how others who are sort of interested in the work you're doing, how they might be able to support that effort.
Thank you. I really appreciate you asking that question. And yeah, it is something that ultimately my mission is to, right when I graduated high school, I did this program called City Year instead of going to college, which was a program where I volunteered with AmeriCorps in a public school in New York City for a year, helping kids with literacy and engagement with school. And I saw that, and that program is all over the United States and in probably 20 major cities. It's in San Jose, Los Angeles, all states across the country, and even in South Africa, I believe, at this point. And I saw the impact of like systems on improving the education system, like a program rather than just like one person at a time. And though I do believe it takes, committed individuals, I was like, wow, like how could I kind of help the system evolve? And as I started this coaching, business and grew it, I thought, how can we make a difference across the board? And one of the things if you research executive function skills, is you find out that peer-reviewed research says that a kid's executive function skills are a stronger determination of their long-term education success than their initial reading or math scores,
I believe
which
that.
is yeah, which is you can look at the report Executive Functions by Dr. Adele Diamond. She's one of the most cited researchers in peer-reviewed research. And so knowing that, the question is, why do we not have a set of common core type standards for executive skill development around like, do kids know how to self-organize? Do they know how to plan? Do they know how to communicate with their teachers and, advocate for their needs, right? We don't have any type of common core standards like that around executive skills. So I wrote them out for grades K through 12, along with advanced standards in case kids progress beyond grade 12 standards. They're on EF Specialists. If you Google standards for executive skills, I share those with districts when I do professional development trainings for their staff. When I'm working with special ed staff to think about like, hey, what kind of objectives or standards do we want to set for kids when they're going through your resource class or learning labs or whatever academic workshop, whatever variation. So I think, for me, it's a one district at a time. I've been hired by districts in the Bay Area to help their special ed staff think about how to provide more value through those resource classes, which are generally open-ended, and some people describe them as like homework cafes or things like that. But I do think that we need to put in a bit more structure around what our
Yeah.
expectations are for going through these special ed programs and services. And so that's my goal in the next 10 years, is to try to support as many public school districts with building in some standards for executive skill development for their special ed students. Hopefully it, ripples.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, dude. When I heard that, I was like, this is nuts. I don't know when Sean sleeps, but he's definitely putting in work. And I remember that got probably like 10 or 15 years ago, I was listening to a presentation from a neuropsych, and I mean, I can't quote them, right? But I remember them saying something to the effect of like, if you were to go to a teacher and have them describe their ideal student, right? They're going to describe a bunch of executive skills, right? They're going to say they're in class on time. They have all the materials with them. They're following instructions, right? They've got the necessary materials organized and out on their desk when they need them, right? I mean, these are, what, really facilitate all other learning, right? Without those executive skills in place, it has this ripple effect on everything else that's going on throughout the school day. And I never thought about it. I mean, you're right. You've got these state standards, that we're teaching, and we're not teaching the most important set of skills, right? Which are these executive functioning skills. So that's fantastic. And other things that sort of kind of came to mind when, I guess two things really sort of stood out to me when you were sharing that. Is one. I mean, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, right? I mean, there's a lot of really wonderful and certainly well-intending educators working with kids and kids with disabilities in schools. But I do think too often those classes that are even sort of presented as executive function classes, right? So they go for a period during the school day to work on executive functioning skills. I think too often there isn't enough skill development, right? Like they end up sort of being this classroom where kids go and somebody comes around and tells them what all their assignments are and sort of takes on the role of the executive for the child in terms of helping them, get things turned in. But the kids aren't developing skills to be able to be more independent with those. And at some point they're not going to be in that class anymore, and they will have not developed the skills that were necessary. And the other thing that came up for me too is one of the, I'm glad that I don't, write IEP goals for a living. That is a very difficult thing for me to do. To write a truly, specific, measurable, achievable, SMART goal for IEPs is challenging, right? And I think, too often, a lot of times these are just sort of selected from some drop-down menu. They're not really personalized to the needs of a child. But what a great resource for parents and special educators and other IEP team members to be able to go to your website and to be able to look at, what are these objectives? What are the skills we want to see this child demonstrating in a year from now, sort of indexed to their age and development, and to be able to, help develop appropriate goals that are then going to drive the services to help them to be able to do those things in a year from now. So Guy, what a great resource, man. Thank you.
Yeah, just to tap on that a little bit, which is, so one thing I've recently done is I write a weekly newsletter, and I'm sure you'll give me a chance to share about that later. But it's I've noticed, because I take data on the people who subscribe, and the majority of people who subscribe are not parents, they're educators. Mm-hmm. And that really gave me pause for consideration recently when I saw that, because I think there's so many educators out there who really want to help, but they just don't know how. And the tools and trainings are not in place. I'll give you an example. I got my master's degree in special ed from Buffalo State, and it was a fantastic experience. That was a great program, and I'm really grateful for it. And then I started working in 2 different school districts, and I never had one training, whether it was in my master's degree program or in my school districts, around how to run an effective resource class. And I'm not blaming anyone. It's just there's a lot going on. But look, this is the majority of work I do, and most special educators do, is run a resource class / academic workshop, learning lab, whatever you want to call it. And there's just no trainings out there. And then I was hired recently by a school district to provide training on it. And I was just Googling to find if there's any other trainings that I could show as examples. There's nothing out there. So I believe I have built the first, program to help districts think about how they can incorporate executive skills into their resource classes
Yeah.
And hopefully that, my whole belief, and this is something when I told you about that city year program that I did, it was very ideal orientated with realistic, concrete steps. But one of the things they said in it is if your mission can be solved in your life, it's not big enough. And so I kind of believe that, like I'm doing this work, I'm putting in my best foot forward, but ultimately will this, be fixed in my life? Probably not, but at least hopefully we move the needle forward a little bit and other people pick up the baton and keep trying to improve the conditions based on what the research and what we know is needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. And yeah, I'd never even thought that the whole idea around like training about how to run a resource classroom and certainly by the time you get to middle school and high school, certainly a lot of those class periods really are supporting kids' executive functioning skills. I mean that for the most part, they're not getting pulled out and doing, intensive reading remediation. It exists, but that's not usually what that sort of general resource class is, right? It's sort of this general support class to help them across all subject areas, and then inevitably kind of comes down to executive functioning skills, and it never occurred to me that and it makes so much sense, right? I mean, teacher training programs aren't, I mean, you got your master's degree, but a credential program alone isn't terribly long, right? They have to cover a lot of different areas, and the idea that there aren't curriculum standards for this, and there isn't sort of a blueprint for how to run an effective classroom for teaching these skills. It makes sense with my experience. I just never really thought about it so so directly, right? That doesn't exist, right? And that's outside of the work that you've done, so it's
Yeah. It's
really
it's
incredible.
it's amazing. I my mom got me a Dyson vacuum for Christmas, and I was, I know, Dyson tried. I think there's a story about he tried to like start a bunch, get his vacuum approved like 100 times and like couldn't sell it or something. But on the vacuum or whatever paperwork, it said this quote. I just read this yesterday. It said like, "We solve the problems other people ignore." And I was like, you know what? That's a great like
Yeah.
line, because it's like sometimes the problem is so in our face and the solution is pretty simple, but we've become accustomed to ignoring it. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess this is just how it is. But
Right.
I think there's a lot of problems out there, and that's kind of like just to think about like that. Hey, if we just like acknowledged it
Right.
and started to like, solve it, it could make I say small tweaks have big peaks. Like this, give teachers training on how to run their resource classes.
Yeah.
Right? Let's give them some training.
Right. And
So
I'm sure they'd eat it up. They got into it to serve kids, right? They want to serve kids. They're good people, right? But if they don't have, the training and skills that are necessary in order to be able to do their job effectively, it's ultimately it hurts the kid, but it's not fair to the teacher either.
yeah.
And that's I'm sure they eat it up, and yeah, not surprised that the number one demographic of folks subscribing to your newsletter are people that are out there, trying to do the work. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel like I could talk to you forever, Sean.
No, I'm loving this, man. This is like, because it's so cool to talk to you, because we are basically two sides of the same coin. And that, the coin is we're trying to solve the problem of, kids who are struggling in school. And you're coming from that really profound, deep place of like assessing the brain challenges and and I'm coming from this like hands-on in the trenches. But it's like it's the same challenge and looking at it from two different perspectives and collaborating. And the missing piece here is the school system, because you and I are both on these 10, it's like a triangle almost, if I can imagine. Like you're assessing, I'm solving the problems outside of the school system. And the missing link here
Yeah.
is the really engaged, proactive educator, or administrators and educators who are like leading the change from within the school system. So there are people out there. Like I want to give a shout out to the Downey School District in Los Angeles, the San Rafael City Schools. These are districts who are actually facing this and being proactive. And
Yeah.
we need more districts stepping into this conversation, being like, let's figure out how to problem solve together, because I really do believe we're on the cusp of something that is truly reformative, I guess, like for the education system. This matters and it needs to be addressed. So yeah, I feel the same way, Dr. Bylund.
Yeah, no, this is great too, and I was just talking with Danielle, our co-director, about this the other day, just in terms of podcast guests and people like yourself that we're excited to bring on and share the work that they're doing. And in my my personal belief, and I think it's historically accurate, right, is when changes are happening in the school district, usually the driver behind that is a strong parent advocate and other professionals working with them, and ultimately it serves to improve the school system for everybody, right? And years and decades later, schools celebrate these landmark decisions that were made that were really fought for hard, by parents of children with disabilities and the people that are helping them. You know, but ultimately, right, it is to sort of move the school system forward, right, and to affect changes that help all kids, right? And one of the things Danielle and I were talking about too is not just having people like yourself on, but hopefully if they would accept having school districts that are creating innovative programs for helping kids to be able to come on and share the exciting work that they're doing too.
Totally.
And it's I like that that way of thinking about it. Hopefully we can have you on again, man. I mean, like I said, I feel like I could talk to you for hours. Like each one of these little nuggets that you shared, I feel like could be like an entire episode in and of itself. But for people that are listening, right, and for the show notes, if you could just share with everybody where they can learn more about EF specialists and the other projects that you're involved in.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation. I know this conversation we've been having has been going for years in terms of the work we've been doing with students, and now we're here chatting, and it's amazing to think of where it can be in 2 years and 5 years, and I'm excited about it. So if you want to follow my work, probably the best place to start is if you go to EF Specialists with an S at the end, specialists.com. You can get on our weekly newsletter, and that's where I write every week a newsletter to almost 6,000 parents and educators around, one thing you can do in 5 minutes or less to help your kid with their executive skills, whether you're a parent or educator. So there's also links from there, you can check out, the Executive Function Coaching Academy. So that's executivefunctioncoachingacademy.com if you want to learn about how you as an educator, if you want to start a coaching business and, do that, you can learn more about that. And then if you're a school district administrator and you want to dig into this stuff, you can check out sped-ed.us. That is my new offer for districts where you can, learn more about how I can support your school team in helping weave in executive skills for your special ed department. So sped-ed.us. I just rolled that out recently. But yeah, the newsletter is a great place to start, and you can just reply to any of my newsletters, and I read everything. And yeah.
No, thank you. I can't thank you enough, Sean. I just really appreciate you taking the time out, to be able to, talk with, our listeners about the, amazing work that you're doing. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bylund, for creating this and putting this out there. And then we didn't even, tap into it, but just for the, really targeted and focused work you're doing on helping parents and district administrators, and professionals understand where executive skill deficits actually reside when you do your assessments. I mean, they're just such a gift, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, have a great day, man.
You too.